Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Would like to welcome you to this virtual segment of the WSIS Forum 2023 and thank everybody who might be in the audience for joining us. In a few minutes, we're going to start the actual session, but before we begin, we'd like to invite you to watch the highlight video from the WSIS Forum that will be started by the WSIS team while we wait for the last few people to stream in. So, Mohammed, I guess that's for you to start. Are we rolling on the video?
You are live, Martin.
Okay, we're live. We don't have the video. Okay, so in that case, I also don't see any list of attendees. I see all of the ITU people and all of the panelists. So hopefully we're also streaming to other people.
The webinar is live and attendees are joining the meeting. So you
okay, excellent. Then I should note that during the panel, everybody's microphones will be muted. So if you would like to chip in, raise your hands. There's the button to raise your hand on the bottom corner. And preferably if you could put your questions in the chat, then we'll be able to talk through the chat and answer the questions through the chat. And what we're going to do is, this is supposed to be a fishbowl format, so we don't have a formal presentations planned in order to have a more vibrant conversation that hopefully digs into the issues in a more personable way than having everybody look at PowerPoints, because I think everybody's used to looking at PowerPoints. But here we've got a nice range of panelists who have a nice range of experiences. We have Emmanuel Ngueom from Cameroon, and he'll introduce himself in a moment. And we have Claudia Pozo, who's originally from Bolivia. She's joining us from Spain today. Parma Krishnamurthy from India, and Onyothi Nekoto, who's originally from Namibia, but today is joining us at the very beginning only from Germany before she runs to the airport to go back to Namibia this afternoon. So let me just briefly give an introduction to the panel, which the purpose of what we're talking about today is language technology, particularly for the languages that are usually outside of the mainstream of research and funding interests. So these are the languages that are spoken by, literally billions of people, but have never garnered enough support or interest or the data necessary to put them online in any meaningful way. So those of us attending this meeting, all of us speak English, but to the best estimates, at the best extent of what you think of as English, 15% of the world speaks that language. So the other 85% would need to access technology in some other way. And most of those 15% wouldn't be able to access technology through English either. But because the focus is on English and French and a few other languages, the languages, particularly of Africa, India, indigenous American languages are pretty much blocked from access to all of the services that we feel normal, that we've come to expect for those of us who speak English. So the point of today's panel is to look at how it is that we can get over that hump. And it's a big challenge. I'm not going to say that that there are easy solutions, but I think there are some solutions, and the panelists here today are working on some of those solutions or have some ideas about them. So before I think I know that Onyothi, you need to run, so why don't we start with you and you tell us a bit about what your experience is with language and technology in Namibia.
Good afternoon, morning, good evening to the audience, fellow panelists. My name is Ndapho Onyothi Nekoto. I am a Namibian software engineer with a strong interest in languages at the moment. The story began with wildlife conservation. I befriended 3 rhinos. We lost them due to poaching, and I wanted to know how we could help as a community, as a nation, to meet government halfway in the private game reserves, but also the communal conservancies who are most affected by poaching. To address the issue of poaching, you needed to understand certain things from Earth observation, well, not Earth observation, from Earth sciences, environmental factors, how they move. You needed to understand what technologies would work in the wild, what the wild looks like, because you have various biomes, each so unique. And the traditional knowledge trackers used to track rhinos on foot was just remarkable. But for other engineers or enthusiasts who wanted to help combat this problem, language would be the problem. So that's how I got into language, that to really capture this knowledge, preserve it, and make use of it, we needed to understand what it was that they were saying. And that's where the journey began. We also saw how these languages were dying because more and more people were leaving the communal and conservancy areas in search of jobs, employment, and their languages were on the brink of extinction now, post-independence. Pre-independence, they've already suffered with Namibia's 100-year colonialism, spanning from the late 1800s all the way to 1989. So yeah, this is how I got into it, and this is still what I'm doing with it. Really to preserve knowledge, but also to build solutions that leverage our norms, our cultures, our heritage, beyond appropriating it to appreciate it, so that we can build solutions that impact and embody our identity. And
what are the solutions that you're working towards?
Right. So far, we built the machine translation models for the widely spoken Namibian language, Ashiwambo. The aim is to translate this content into the other 11 languages, and then also move over to speech technology. So we started off with machine translation, and then we move over to speech technology, and these are at least what we're hoping to build within the speech technologies and the other machine translation models by the end of the year, over the next 18 months. But the goal is to create 1 million data sets for a Namibian language. It seems, for the average NLP researcher on the African continent, that is a long shot. But if we look at it from, the wisdom of ages, and looking at it through the eyes of a child, where we bridge generational gaps in knowledge, then it is attainable. It is definitely something that is attainable, but we also don't want to do it for free. We want to create a quality data set. We need to allocate adequate funding to ensure that we do create quality data sets. And this process needs, the actors in this entire process need to be well funded. So yeah, the goal is 1 million data sets in the next at least 500,000 in the next 24 months. And so far, we're at least over 100,000. So we're still pushing. And
100,000 words in the data centers?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So we have 900,000 to go.
And so just before we get to cut in with the other people, just so where are you looking for the funding? Where are you getting the funding, and what, what sort of data are you? How are you eliciting the data, and what sort of data do you have? If you could do that, in a few minutes.
It was all self-funded. It was all self-funded. It started off as a passion project. I joined Masakane, and we reached out to institutions, donors, organizations who are very eager to fund the workshop creations. We're grateful to Google, the Harper Dean Foundation, and Yungon, Bune and fiscal sponsors such as the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science, and Davor at Knowledge for All, who've just contributed to at least the first 100,000 sets, but also all my employers who've made it possible for me to have a job and fund my own passion projects. To scale up their avenues such as the Lacuna Fund. These are some of the topics we're exploring. We're also moving into collaborations now to see how sectors within communal conservancies where language and culture are home to language and culture can also come to the table and invest in creating language technologies as a source of income for the communities in which they operate in. So, so far self-funded, we've had some funding from these institutions that I've mentioned before, and going forward is to continue to raise more funds and apply to institutions to really invest into it. And perhaps if not funding them, we can get some data from government and private sectors in which they can open source to us to create technologies, or in which we can create technologies together. But that has to come with educating them as well on why we need this to be done.
Great. Well, maybe we should move on to some of the other participants. And I was hoping maybe to go to Emmanuel first. So Nyothi's raised a lot of very interesting points, and one of the points, so she's sitting here trying to self-fund this break into to technology in one small country for one language group, and it's she's somehow having to self-fund it. Where for most languages there just isn't funding, and there really isn't very much interest. But what we can see, I think, is a fair amount of harm from people being excluded. What I've talked with Emmanuel about in the past is this notion that we've, the reason we've gotten here to where we are is that in, starting in 1884 in Africa and in earlier years in the US and Canada and other parts of the indigenous Americas, there came into play this notion that education, schooling should be in French, should be in English. Those were the right and proper languages, and there's been a lot of suppression of languages that people spoke. So there's been this big experiment that's been being conducted upon children in schools, for example, for around the world, with the premise that they should be learning in a language that is a foreign language to them, where that language in many cases has actually remained a foreign language. So there would be a notion of reparations, of going back and trying to pay back, but there's also a notion that, okay, well, what's happened has happened. The real point is, how do we move on? How do we find a way to make things right for people going forward, on the assumption that people are not going to change their minds, change the languages they speak overnight, and that we could lose entire generations. How do we then, because it's fairly easy to teach a computer a language, much easier than teaching millions of people a language. And so, Emmanuel, you came up, provided this term that from the Bassa language of Cameroon. Could you explain to Gwet and how this applies in the language context?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really happy to be part of this panel and to get to meet, even though virtually, with all these great people from around the world. Yeah, so you mentioned Bassa, so I'm speaking from Cameroon, of course, you mentioned it, and Bassa is a Bantu language spoken in more or less in the central region of Cameroon. And the term to Gwet, which of course we had a discussion on a couple of months or weeks ago, is actually a religious rite that is meant to repair a wrongdoing that has occurred for some reason, but with the intention not to blame anyone, not to punish anyone, but to prevent it from happening. And of course, while we do that, we expect that this is going to have a transformative effect on the people to get to know that there is space for everyone. So that's the philosophy behind this thing, trying to accommodate the differences, even our imperfections. So it is a fact that all languages do not have equal opportunities. Neither do all individuals. This is a fact of life. But that doesn't mean that we should exclude those who do not have the power to maybe to run the technology industry, to run the knowledge industry. So that's I think the relevance of trying to leverage this concept of Gwet, which means repairing and preventing. So that's it.
Great, thanks. So maybe Claudia, could you step in and talk a little bit about the state of language access digitally around the world and the effects that has on people of different abilities to access it in, and whether by gender, by handicap, or just by where they are and where they live.
Right. Well, let me step back a little bit, perhaps, and reintroduce myself and talk a little bit about what is my approach, or rather, my feminist collective's approach to this issue. So, well, thanks for having me, first of all. I am a brown Latin American woman. I would like to start there. My first language is Spanish. I also speak a tiny bit of Quechua, which is the native tongue of my mother. I am originally from Bolivia, as you said earlier, but I've been living abroad for a couple of years, so I'm also a migrant. And currently, I am the coordinator of the Language Justice Program at Whose Knowledge. Whose Knowledge is a global campaign to center online the knowledge of marginalized communities. And for this, we work particularly with women, people of color, LGBTQIA+ communities, indigenous peoples, and others from the global majority world. So our entry point to languages is through what we call epistemic and knowledge justice. This framework is an invitation to do continuous, deep analysis and interrogation of whose voices, faces, and stories are missing from the internet and whose knowledge is represented online and why. So language, as we know and as we have been hearing, is much more than simply a means of communication, right? Every language is a way of knowing and inhabiting the world. It is really an essential part of our identities, our histories, and at Whose Knowledge, we also see language as a proxy for knowledge, or as a way to understand knowledge. And we sustain that when marginalized communities cannot add or access knowledge in their own language on the internet, this reinforces and deepens inequalities and invisibilities that already exist offline. So language justice is to recognize that the internet and digital technologies in general do not understand and represent the depth and the richness of the over 7,000 languages in the world, including spoken and signed languages. So we ask whose languages are represented online and why, right? So as an attempt to answer these and other questions, we created the State of the Internet's Language Report back in February 2022 in partnership with the Center of Internet and Society in India, and the Oxford Internet Institute. And in this report, we map the current status of the languages on the internet, and we raise awareness of challenges, opportunities in making the internet more multilingual, and we also kind of offer an agenda for action. So one of the things we found through this report, through the research, is that the internet is nowhere as near as multilingual as it should be, or to reflect the human knowledge, to reflect the global society that we are today. So for example, if we turn our eyes towards Africa, we see that nearly 90% of the population in Africa have to switch to a different language that is not their first language in order to meaningfully use the internet. And there are also great barriers in terms of how different marginalized communities across the globe bring their knowledges online. These barriers are both related to infrastructure, like low access, difficulties in accessing devices or keyboards with the correct signs, with the correct letters for different languages, but also in terms of support of different platforms, of the most used platforms and websites that we use today. Most of these websites really aren't offering a very well, a good experience for people whose first language is not English or other regionally dominant language or other Euro-colonial languages. So those people who really are the majority of the world, who are not able to use these platforms meaningfully, they cannot bring their knowledges online, therefore their languages are not represented online. And the issue runs much more deeper than representation itself, because as I was saying, language is so important in terms of memory, in terms of history, that the absence of those languages is really hindering the possibility of having an internet that truly reflects the knowledge of humanity.
Thanks so much. Maybe then, Param, if you might be able to introduce yourself and then tell us a bit about how what Claudia has been talking about resonates with your experiences in India. India has more than a billion people and lots of languages, and most of those are just so poorly represented online or with access that people can have. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, and thanks for having me today. So we know that NLPs, our language technology researchers, are growing in use and plays a vital role in many of our day-to-day activities, right? And however, the development and the technology, such as technology such as chatbots, machine translation, virtual assistants, and a lot of other technologies are not as equitable as it may appear now, right? To put it into the perspective, India is a land of multilingualism. We have thousands of languages. Only certain languages are being scheduled by the government and officially being called as scheduled languages. But vast majority of a lot of technology researches happen or amplified in only in certain languages, which has a lot of population and a lot of market. And also a lot of data that are the resources that are available. So India is a land, that we do have a lot of classical languages where languages are rich in their knowledge system in terms of a lot of documents from centuries of documents that are available. So their knowledge-wise very rich, but when it comes to the resource-wise, we have been called as low resources since a lot of resources are not available. Languages like English, Indian English, Hindi, or other major languages like Bengali, Tamil, Telugu are part of these activities, but there are a lot of minor languages, a lot of dialects, varieties. We have thousands of such scenarios and things are not being represented rightly even today in the technology world. There are many reasons for such things, because the government planning and also the funding that we want to work on low resource languages are very poor in terms of there is less population, and even the current generations are been changing towards monogramming their language into one language, like they are mostly into the English based education. So these are all some of the things which are affecting the language use per se, and even mother tongue medium of instructions and educations are getting getting lower every day, because people are interested in going in globally, and globalization is being mostly welcomed in India. So that's all one of the reasons why a lot of languages are not being represented, and a lot of resources and data are not being built for Indian languages. So to say about a little bit about me, I am an academician working at International Institute of Information Technology. So we are one of the institute where we work for language technologies and build a lot of resources for languages. One of the teams over here, we are building even Wikipedia data for other lot of Indian languages. We are trying to represent most languages in open source, so that a lot of people will involve and a lot of data sources will be built. So the other task that we are involved is building machine translation, that to speech machine translation. So for last 20 years, a lot of research institutes in India, we come together and we build Indian language to Indian language machine translation systems. Now we are in the pipeline of building speech to speech. So again, only certain languages are represented, because we know that the current technology requires a lot of data. Language technology is a data hungry one. So only certain languages are being represented, not all. So giving this kind of scenario, now we are in a condition where we need to build a lot of data sets for smaller and indigenous other represented language. Also, we want to do a lot of augmentation work in building, improving the data sets that are available, and a lot of cleaning process are required, which takes time and effort. So the less access that we have for the native language resources, that means we have less data that is directly affecting us in working on building technology tools for such languages. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I would like also first maybe to go back to Emmanuel and ask, given what we've just been hearing from Param, could you talk maybe to the experience of if one were a young Basa speaking woman who was trying to get school education for maybe a STEM subject? Could you talk about the experience that she might have trying to get that education from a language point of view, and what sort of resources would be available to her, and what sort of resources your institute might be able to be working towards or isn't able to work towards?
Yeah, thank you again. So that gives me the opportunity to kind of give maybe a broader presentation of who I am, so that the audience gets more context about me. So I'm an educationist. I'm teaching at the teachers training school in Cameroon, Yaoundé. And what I'm teaching is Cameroonian languages and culture. So this subject was introduced in, let's say, government-owned schools more or less 10 years ago, and we have been struggling to make it thrive, and we have been having a very hard time, and maybe I'll come to that. So now, what about the experience of a young girl or boy who wishes to take STEM education in their language? Well, the most telling example would be myself. I grew up in a village, in Basa village. My parents were just farmers. And we were forced. We were talking our, Basa at home. That's all we know. So all our word, all we could express, our word views, our, feelings, everything that was part of us was in Basa. And then we were sent to school, and then a brutal rupture happened, because we had to pursue education in French, but we were also forbidden to speak. Basa. So we were punished and brutally, we were beaten, we were humiliated. So this is how we went about this. And if you ask me if there's any available school in Cameroon where someone, a boy, a girl would have access, because there are many communities in Cameroon and elsewhere in Africa where the indigenous language is the only means for expressing and accessing knowledge. In Cameroon, there is no such infrastructure, knowledge and educational infrastructure to accommodate this kind of profile. There is none. So, I can't even, talk about it because it's non-existent. And one thing I would like to mention, cultures are products of history. Cultures are manufactured by social interaction. So if you start telling something to someone repeatedly, that will be part of his or her beliefs. And if you start telling it to many people, that's going to be part of their culture. So we have reached a level where our culture now has enacted and accepted the fact that we cannot move forward. We cannot get a job. We cannot be promoted. We cannot get access to knowledge if we are using our languages. So we are the ones now fighting against our languages. That's the critical aspect that is happening in Cameroon. I'm in a teachers training school, and we are training teachers to go and teach local languages, and they are just despised. They are not considered to be teachers on equal, on par with like French teachers, English, mathematics teachers. So this is the situation. So even before we start talking about what means, technologies, internet, the fact is, this is something that we do not believe in. And I think what we need to start doing is to change that narrative, is to try to build up a strong narrative, in the public space that is going to give more, that is going to revive these languages. Just the fact that people should accept that they are around. Yeah.
Thanks so much. And I think one thing that what you're saying speaks to is that people in so many places have had the experience of having their language suppressed, but have not in any way felt themselves as part of a community on that basis, that there's no, that within a language group, people that don't necessarily see it as a possibility of something that they can advocate for their own language. And there's not a constituency across languages on the basis of a shared experience of not having access to technologies and knowledge in their languages. Perhaps Claudia, you could speak a bit to that, about what you see from people who speak, languages large and small. So we're talking, in some ways, we're talking about endangered languages that are that might vanish over the course of decades. But in some ways, we're talking about languages with tens of millions of people that are doubling every 25 years. So if you might be able to speak to that a bit, and then I would like to see if those of you on the panel could ask each other questions. I don't, I think you might have questions for each other, and I would stay silent after Claudia speaks for a bit.
Thank you, Martin. I think there are some very important questions, issues for conversation that are popping up, and I am loving this really. So I want to bring together, offer a few thoughts. I think this violent repression of native languages that Emmanuel was speaking about is we cannot talk about that without talking about our histories of colonization, right? Because they are so intertwined, interlinked. Processes of colonization, as we know, and mass genocide and extractivism have shaped the language world map that we have today, right? Minority languages, or quote unquote minority languages, and languages in danger of dying, Martin, which you were mentioning, right? Which are over 40% of all languages today, were once regionally dominant languages. used by millions of peoples from indigenous nations, different communities across the world, especially across the global majority world, which today are Asia, Africa, the Americans, the Caribbean, the Pacific Islands, right? So also important to note is that most of these languages were non-textual forms of communication, right? They were oral, they were gestural, they were visual, and they were transmitted to even through sounds like drums, right? Today, like of the over 7,000 languages of the world, only about 4,000 of them have written systems or scripts. And most of these systems these writing systems were developed through colonization, rather by languages speakers themselves. And what happens is that those languages that do not have written systems have remained at the margins of the publishing industry, the academia, right, in general of the public online knowledge production. And that speaks to also what Parami and Dapiwa were speaking before about natural language processing technologies, because those languages that do not have written systems, they are not included, or that's not a word I like, but they are not considered into these new technologies. And that means that they are further excluded from digital language technologies, but also in general, the knowledge production at large. And this is critical because, again, as Dapiwa was mentioning, indigenous languages in particular, they guard such important knowledge today that is so critical to our world today, especially to, resist the impending climate crisis, for example, right? And what is happening with that oral knowledge? Where does it fit in this new digital language landscape? Right. That's, I think, one key question I wanted to bring. And the second thing I wanted to say is around gender discrimination that you were also mentioning, Martin. I think the way I see that is, of course, gender discrimination is epidemic around the world. But for us, we recognize that different systems of power and privilege are so hard to dismantle because they encompass multiple and interlocking forms of oppression, right? We cannot just address gender discrimination without addressing patriarchy or racism or colonization or homophobia, just to name a few, right? Because they reinforce each other. So to really advance towards knowledge equity and knowledge justice, we have to call out for all these systems of power and privilege that define really how our technology is designed, how our technology is built, who is it built for, who is it built by, right? So I wanted to offer those thoughts as sort of a provocation to continue the conversation.
Hara, maybe you could respond to the question of who is it built for and who is it built by?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Claudia, for bringing a lot of important points to the ground. There are a lot of issues when we are, especially when you are living in a multilingual country like India, like not only this one, because we do have a lot of class system, a lot of hegemonies, and a lot of even the language system that is working in our languages. We do have the languages are differently can be identified because of India is known for a lot of caste system too. So a lot of many things affect the representation of our languages and people, because language is just a gateway for all our culture and knowledge, resources and other things. So there are several other issues influence the technology growth and how these languages are being represented in ICT and other things, and especially the under-resourced are the languages with less population, all these things. And when you again look at the NLP or the other activities, so we need resources, we need a lot of other things. And the first important technology what we need is, we have thousands of languages. We have languages which uses different scripts. not the same script. For example, if you take languages like Dravidian language, which is spoken majorly in the southern part of India, we have major 4 languages like Telugu, Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam. All 4 languages use different script. So we need different fonts, we need normalizations, we need to collect their data from various resources. And under the Dravidian language family, we have other 20 plus languages which are not represented with any script. So these languages tend to use the common, the nearest, the powerful, the like in power in terms of the political power or the population, all those which are represented well, those languages script. So what happened, for example, there is a language called Kodava, which is spoken in the southern part of India in 2 states. So Kodava speaker uses 2 different scripts to write in their languages. So that was also one of the reasons they are unable to be converted and augmented in building, a lot of other things. So especially as she has rightly pointed out, other societal issues affect our language technology in multiple ways. So it's not only about the resources and that are there, knowledge representation that are being built, but more than that, the attitude of the speaker, the attitude of the government, also the attitude of the researchers towards that language affect our languages to be represented in ICT or in technology world a lot. So the attitude need to be taken care so that our languages will be well represented, and the equality has to be brought in, because that's more important. Because when a lot of research happen in one languages, people tend to lose their identity because they want to move on to the language which has a lot of resources, a lot of information, a lot of job opportunities, right? So the mother tongues are very important, and we are all fighting in India to promote the mother tongue based education, because at least till our generation we all been studied in our mother tongue education system. But now we have a system called KG to PG, like kindergarten to post graduation, everything to be changed into English so that our students will get a lot of opportunities. But that's not the right thing. So we are fighting with the government, we are writing to the government to involve a lot of linguist language activities into the board, so that a lot of changes should happen, so that we can bring some changes, because we cannot we cannot leave out our languages. All our languages should be represented. So the right use of language in technology and building application for our languages are very much important. What I would say is technology is one of the important, powerful medium right now. So if our languages are represented properly, that would really help us. So we, as a researcher, I feel we have to work towards in building a lot of such things to our society.
Thanks so much. And I would like to, I have a question for Emmanuel and for you, Param. But first, so I've been working with ACALAN, the African Academy of Languages, which is the intergovernmental board that in Africa for the African Union that works on language policy and language technology. And so the people who are within ACALAN, and the government agents for those governments, by and large, accept what you're talking about in some ways, have a feeling that local languages are important. Perhaps some local languages more than others. So in Tanzania, there is a large emphasis on Swahili and a de-emphasis on the other 121 languages spoken around the country. And in Uganda, whatever else you might think about the ruler of Uganda, Museveni, he personally has been involved in writing a dictionary for the language that he grew up speaking. So he, there is in Uganda these feelings within government that it's essential to promote the ability of people to communicate and make and learn and interact in their own languages. But in other situations, in other countries, but also in other parts of government that are not those a Ministry of Education or a place that deals specifically with language, there might be countervailing attitudes towards what should be done. So in Kenya, there's lots of push towards digitalization of, for example, being able to file and do your taxes online. But that gets to the extent that you can read certain tax information in Swahili, not in the other 40-odd languages of Kenya, online, but you can only actually do all the paperwork to file your taxes online in English. So this notion that being able to go through life in a language that you understand doesn't move that far down the pyramid in that department within Kenya. Perhaps, Emmanuel, you could speak to that, about this dichotomy between within government and within industry, companies in the country, towards, on the one hand, seeing the importance of local languages, and on the other hand, feeling that either English or French, as the language that they've been schooled in, that they are able to communicate in, is perhaps the only language that is in need of support within different departments.
Yeah, that's very important question. I think, and I've been critical over the past years about African linguistics and the direction it has taken, that centers on some object called language. We have been talking in this panel about languages. So it is part of our imaginary. So we imagine this to be a reality. And I just mentioned that if you start talking about something over and over, and many people are talking about it, then it becomes culture. Well, I think if we are focusing on this object language, we are perhaps missing the goal. My take is that we should focus on the social life of people, because what is language? Language is about social life. It is only visible through social life. So if we take some of the facts of social life of the people and bring it to the spotlight, let me give a very short example. Every one of us here, and you are having coffee, I have seen it. So perhaps the coffee that you are drinking right now comes from my place. Who knows? But you don't know it, right? You just go in the shop and buy coffee. It's okay. What about if we could bring part of me, part of my culture, part of where that coffee comes from, into your coffee, into your mug, so to say, so that as you drink that coffee, you have some experience with that people. I think if we create that connection between social life and language, for me, language is just a residual artifact that is breathed through social life. And this is what we have been missing. You're talking about governments facing this, difficulty translating their intents and maybe goodwill into action. It's because, when we are talking about taxes, taxes are part of a culture that was brought to us in a language, and it's very difficult to change it. What about taking the things that are part of our culture and bringing them to the other side, right? And perhaps if you and other people drinking coffee start talking about my language positively, perhaps this is going to change my perspective on my language. I think we need linguistics and cultural studies, and technology needs to work through, according to me, through bridging this knowledge gap. I call it knowledge gap in the globalized society. What do we know about each other? India is closer to me than Switzerland. Yet I know very few things about India. So to me, we have to put social life again at the spotlight. And because social life is factual, it's emotional, it speaks to people more directly than we can do through grammars, dictionaries, and all these things. I'm not saying that this is not important, but I think the work that we have been doing, we linguists, for years, and which is not meeting the expectations. I think something needs to be done in that regard.
Thanks so much. And I know that we're running now very close to the time limit. So maybe if I could give each of you a few moments to wrap up, to give final thoughts, and maybe direct your final thoughts towards what do you see as a path forward in the current technology environment and the current funding environment? How realistic is it actually to be thinking about bringing in the people who are excluded? You know, what can we do, and what is not going to happen because of either technology or funding, or you know, some of the perspectives that people have that maybe this isn't a priority that is worthy of attention. So maybe we start with Param, go to Claudia, and end with Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, there may be we need a lot of changes in terms of government is the major thing. Government plays a very important role. So for example, in India, in 2020, it has approved a new education policy after a lot of years. 1986 was the education policy that has been used for last 30 plus years, 35 years. They have used the same policy, but that NEP, new education policy in India, is one of the welcoming thing, I would say, because it imposes, or it asks the educationists to bring a lot of regional language into the board. It also kind of encouraging the schools to teach in mother tongue medium of instruction till 5th standard, at least till at the age of at least till at the attain 10 years. So see, the use of language is most important thing. If we don't use the language, and there may be a lot of factor, our societal factor and other inequality factors and many other factors will be there, but unless we use the language in real time situation, our languages will die. So there was also study in India where we are trying to say the GDP of India has been contributed mostly by the Indian language speakers than English, though English is being used most widely in the paperwork and other things, but our Indian languages contribute more to the economic activities of thing. So all these points, education, economy, and the societal other information which are important has to be taken care, and we have to promote the language use. So that's the most important thing what I feel. Also, we have to promote the speakers to write and build a lot of resources in their languages, either it is an open source or whatever other sources. Once these languages are well represented in terms of data and other information, that will help the researchers to take forward and work on it. So I would say that the representation of language in all domains is the most important key factor that we have to take forward now.
Yes, so as to my final remarks, well, I have so many thoughts, but I want to bring two things that Parami and Emmanuel said that I loved very much, which is on one hand, that we need to continue building tech for our languages. And also when we talk about languages, we are talking about connections, we are talking about social life. And so from there, the first closing remark I have is that we need to center language tech in the context, in the needs, in the designs, and in the imaginations of locally based, but globally connected language communities, rather than tech that assumes that one language fits all, right? Like I designed this for language, but it's going to fit Quechua, Aymara, and Guarani as well, right? So I think even though the tech industry is not entirely responsible for how and why most languages are not represented online, I think their values is still the values of the sector, right? Still perpetuate the mechanisms that marginalized languages online. So I think one important thing to consider, well, especially developers, is that digital technologies really must reflect like how this tech is created, right? And how their companies and their policies are contributing to deepening existing systemic issues, including language discrimination, right? Tech industry is a key player. Tech companies are key players. They must put ethics and community consent at the core of their design and creation, right? Ensuring that language communities have the power and have the safety over what and how they share. And yeah, I think language speakers should be really central part of this process, this developing process, right? And we should be able to create content on the different platforms, using different tools, right? And tech companies and standards organizations should prioritize this participative model and see it as a fundamental part of the process, right? So I think in general, the call here is to redesign, reimagine processes to develop language technology that are open, that are transparent, that are welcoming for different marginalized communities from different language speakers, in a way that at the end we really build a multilingual internet, because the truth is that technology allows what offers us possibilities to represent the plurality of language forms, right, that are based around text, sound, and so on. And we should just use these opportunities to really build something that represents, the whole of our knowledges.
Yeah, I share, of course, most of the thoughts that that my colleagues have just said. I would just like to add, because when we are talking about language endangerment and marginalization, of course, this is a cover term, but that doesn't really account for the deepest reality of what we are meaning. We are having languages like Swahili that are considered to be let's say underdocumented in comparison to English. But then if I take a language like Basa, my language, in comparison with to Swahili, the gap is even, so we really have. So to me, and I'm really speaking from my perspective of member of a very small community, and if there are even smaller community than mine, it's really to get people to be part of the discourse, the narrative, the global narrative, that they should feel that they matter, they are part of the conversation. For example, and I would like to end with that because we are running out of time. I would have loved to give this, like to participate in my language in this forum. Those are the kind of things that we should go promoting. Of course, that wouldn't make much difference. But then if my people can hear me talking to the world in my language, that can be a game changing, To me, the symbolic reason for very minority communities is very important. Even before we move to the next stage, which is building the infrastructure that can sustain diversity in the global world.
Thanks so much, Emmanuel, and to all of you. And unfortunately, we did lose Onyosi for going off to her flight. Maybe a point on what you're saying, Emmanuel. So we're working with a group in the Eastern Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, an indigenous group that speaks the Kinyundu language, and they are coming from, building their own dictionary and really struggling for the resources to be able to preserve their language, because they feel themselves so under threat that they started their own indigenous movement to preserve their language and other cultural aspects of their culture. So, but it's been a real struggle to try to get funding for them to do their work. There are tiny little pots of $1,000 here, $2,000 there that they might be able to get, but that does not, if you think about the millions or billions that are spent on some of the world's languages, the sorts of things to be able to type into a few things into a Word document is not, pales in comparison to what's invested in a language where somebody sees that there's a financial payout. So the question is, what sorts of payouts can we envision that go beyond the financial payout? So the notion that I would like to perhaps close the session with is that there are a lot of things that we can do. It was heartening when I was able to visit Param's department in Hyderabad 6 years ago, I guess, and see all of the things that are being done. But at the same time, one of India's leading institutes has so little resources compared to what's available to somebody stepping into a department at a university like Stanford or much less a Google or a Microsoft. How do we convince people at institutions like that, but also at foundations that fund important issues like healthcare or the environment, that language is central to things like healthcare or the environment in order to be able to work with people? I don't have answers to that, and I don't think we'll be able to arrive at the answers to that today, but I would like to see these on the table. And these are the things going forward, this idea of Gwet, that we can recognize that there are these things that happened in the past that have gotten us to this situation, and we need to take account of those. But while we take account of those, let's really look at how we can find the solutions that need to be found. And I ask everybody who's watching this webinar to think about that and offer your contributions, and thank everybody for attending. Before we officially close the session, WSIS invites you to explore the agenda and the program of the forum. And it's on the webpage, and consider yourself actively participating. And in the closing, I'd like to invite the WSIS team to play the WSIS Forum 2023 Partners video, and thank everybody who's participated, that the panelists are participating and joining us from your various parts of the world. Okay, so thanks, Manuel, Param, and Claudia, if you're all still there. I will just see you offline at various places. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you to the team, the ITU team.
Thank you so much.
So thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.